Landon Cassill will officially drive for Kaulig Racing in 2022. Boris Said might be making a return to NASCAR in 2022 in the NASCAR Cup Series. And Josh Williams had his reveal where he'll be driving for in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2022. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to another video. We've got a ton of NASCAR stories and IndyCar stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off with Pitbull, as Pitbull will be doing a pre-race concert for the Clash at the LA Coliseum. It'll most likely be taking place during the heat race before the main feature happens right after the heats take place. He'll most likely do a pre-race concert. Pitbull is an owner in the NASCAR Cup Series as an owner of Trackhouse Racing, and he's a guy that has been releasing music very recently, and one of the legends, I think, of music overall, and has won many Grammys. Pitbull, I think, will do a really good job in his concert, and I think it's really cool they've gotten Pitbull to do the pre-race concert. I know his peak was maybe a few years ago, but he's a guy that still knows how to get it done as a person in this industry, so overall, really exciting that Pitbull is going to overall do a pre-race concert. I think it's really awesome, and hopefully he'll do a really good job in his pre-race concert. I think it'd be really cool if he could do very well. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to unfortunately turn this to a sour note. As it was announced last night that unfortunately Unser Sr. has passed away at the age of 82 years old. Unser Sr. was one of the legends of motorsports. He was one of only 4 drivers that have won 4 Indianapolis 500s. AJ Foyt, Unser Sr., Helio Castroneves, and Rick Mears are the only 4 drivers that have gone on to win 4 Indy 500s. And it's really sad to hear this news. My prayers and condolences go out to this family. We've lost a lot of legends in motorsports this year. Bob Jenkins, Robin Miller, among other drivers and people we've lost this year. And unfortunately, Unser Sr. has joined him, which is really sad and a really tragic story. So my prayers and condolences go out to his family at his time. He was 82 years old. My prayers and condolences go out. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Mahindra Tractors. As Mahindra Tractors is going to sponsor Chase Briscoe in 2022 on his number 14 car. They will sponsor him the Daytona 500, and he will have a majority races. They will be the anchor sponsor for him in 2022, and they will also sponsor his midget in 2022, and it's been confirmed that he will run the 2022 Chili Bowl Nationals as well. This is a really big partnership. Mahindra Tractors has not sponsored a car, I believe, since Robert Richardson Jr. had an race in the Xfinity Cup back in like 2011 and 2012. So it's been a very long time since this sponsor has been around. But it's really cool that Mahindra Tractors has come in and stepped up to the plate. Apparently, multiple teams have been involved in the bidding to get the sponsor to be available to be used. So it's really cool that SHR was able to secure it. And one thing I also will say about it is this car looks absolutely amazing. I think it's got to be top 2 or 3 best cars so far that are revealed with the number placement that has been placed on the car so far of the official sponsors. I do plan on doing like a full paint scheme video when all the paint schemes do officially end up getting finalized for 2022. But I think it's really awesome. The car looks great, and I'm overall extremely happy that we're going to see this car out there next year. I think it looks really awesome, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Indianapolis Raceway Park. As Indianapolis Raceway Park has changed their name from their old name they had in 2021, and they'll be changing their name to Lucas Oil Indianapolis Raceway Park starting in the 2022 season. Indianapolis Raceway Park is making its return to NASCAR for the first time since 2011 in the 2022 season, where they will host NASCAR Camp World Truck Series races, which will be the opening race of the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series playoffs. I think everyone's really called it IRP, regardless of what they used to call Lucas Oil Raceway, but I think most people have called it IRP for a very long time, and I'm overall really glad that they have recognized that's what their name should be overall. So I think it's really awesome for sure that they've gone ahead and change up the name of it. I think it makes a lot of sense to change up the name, and the name just is moniker. And I saw some people that weren't overall really happy about this, but for me, as a fan of IRP, I think it makes more sense to have IRP, just the original Lucas Oil IRP. You can still incorporate Lucas Oil as the name of the track, but you need, in my opinion, have IRP as the main branding of the track. So I think it's really awesome as a whole, and I'm happy to see that Lucas Oil Raceway Park has changed their name to IRP, and it's a more recognizable name, though I will say most people already were recognizing it as IRP. So this overall is really awesome, and I'm happy that this is the name they're going with for the future. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Ryan Bell. Now, Ryan Bell was the crew chief of Mike Harmon Racing, was one of the people that unfortunately got penalized for the testing violation. About a month ago, about a couple weeks ago, it was revealed that My Car Racing had been in violation of the testing policies where they were in a charity event at Rockingham. Now, they had the old configuration of car, the Dodges on the track, but they also had the new car on track. On top of that, they posted it on social media, which is one of the reasons why they unfortunately got in trouble for the incident. Now, Ryan Bell, like I said, had an interview recently with Kicking in Tires, and he says that his career as a crew chief after the $50K fine for testing at Rockingham may unfortunately be coming to an end because they may not be able to pay the fine that was placed for the team. Look, I really do feel bad in a sense for My Car Racing. I do think the penalty was very, very harsh. I don't think, especially for a small team like that, I don't think they should have gotten a $50K fine for a testing violation, especially when it really was a charity event. I don't think they deserved the penalty they got. But at the same time, they honestly should, in my opinion, have not even posted it on social media. If they probably honestly would have gotten away with it, even if it was a charity event, they would have gotten away with it if they did not post it on social media, because that's really the only reason, in my opinion, why they unfortunately end up getting in trouble. Because like I said, if they would have not posted on social media, they wouldn't have gotten any sort of penalty. So it really is their fault, and they really shot themselves in the foot. But like I said, I do in some aspects feel a little bit bad for them because they really are a team that's trying to make it and keep going for a long time. And My Car Racing, they try to not sometimes follow the rules, but at the same time, I really do hope that there's a chance that they can get it rescinded. But honestly, I don't think they're going to get the penalty rescinded just because it was posted on social media and NASCAR's evidence to back it up. So we'll have to wait and see what happens when they do appeal it, but I'm not sure, honestly, if they're going to appeal it, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Paul Tracy. As Paul Tracy will not return to the commentary booth for IndyCar and NBC in 2022. Paul Tracy has been in the IndyCar and NBC booth since around 2014. He was a guy who's one of the best racers in IndyCar, a guy that won a lot of races and also won a championship, I believe, in the 2003 season. And like I said, he's been one of the faces of the IndyCar booth with NBC and Versus since 2014. But he will not be returning in 2022. Paul Tracy, I know a lot of people have had a lot of their opinions on what he said on social media. And his opinions definitely are a little bit controversial, per to say, but I will say Paul Tracy, I think, was a very excellent and a very, very solid commentator. And it definitely is really, really unfortunate that Paul Tracy is not going to be returning because he's a guy that really did have an unfiltered opinion and could really sometimes say what he wanted. And honestly, I kind of listened to him because he did a really good job in the commentary booth. On top of that, he definitely was interesting in the SRX, but he probably still potentially could return to the SRX. He's not done racing. He's potentially still going to be racing next year. And I think he was kind of getting out of it anyways because he only did a few select races in 2022 because he was mainly focused on trying to race in the SRX as well. The big question, though, is who is going to replace him in the IndyCar booth in the 2022 season. A lot of rumors and indication have stated that James Hinchcliffe could potentially be his replacement for 2022. James Hinchcliffe has been involved in commentary at NBC in the past. He did some pit reporting for them in 2020, I think in 2020. And also, he has done commentary for CBS as well. And I think he is a very solid commentator. And I think for a guy that doesn't have as much commentating experience as other people do, I think he's overall done an excellent and a really, really good job. So I think he's going to end up replacing him for sure, at least for the Indy 500. They'll probably get a rotation of people to commentate throughout the 2022 season, but it definitely is really, really unfortunate. But at the same time, it does not shock me, and it does not surprise me, to be honest with you, that he most likely will not be, is that he's not going to be returning to the commentary booth. Like I said, it's really unfortunate, but it is what it is, and I'm wishing him the best luck in his future endeavors because he most likely will be racing next year in some sort of capacity. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Joey Gase Racing. Now, Joey Gase Racing had an interview with Casey Campbell, another content creator and a journalist in the community, and he had an interview with him recently, and Joey Gase said that Joey Gase plans to run half of the season as a driver for the team. Shane Lee will run some races while as other drivers in those cars for 2022. This is definitely overall very, very interesting that Joey Gase is only going to run half the season. We know that Joey Gase Racing is going to be forming a team, and Shane Lee, he's getting cars from Shane Lee and H2 Motorsports, so it definitely does not surprise me that Shane Lee is going to get involved. Shane Lee has not competed in NASCAR, I believe, since 2019, so it's been a couple years since he has raced in NASCAR, a driver who has driven for RCR and other organizations in the past. And like I said, he had a really, really unfortunate bad falling out with the H2 Motorsports organization when they lost their finding, and Matt Hurley basically jumped ship from NASCAR and had a lot of issues and also went to prison at the same time as well. So It's definitely interesting. I don't overall know what other drivers they could get. I would assume maybe they'll get some guys maybe from Kaulig Racing to run the cars that aren't available, or maybe some other up-and-coming drivers from the lower respected series could also be chosen as potential drivers to get into these cars. But it is what it is overall and who they choose. Joey Gates does not surprise that it's cool to see that he is opening up an Xfinity Series team. There have been rumors that maybe they're getting some of the Penske stuff next year as well, and it's rumored that they may be running Fords as well going into next year. They technically have ran, but they really weren't amazing. They technically ran in some of those respective races when he drove for the SS Greenlight Rickware Racing organization. So it definitely overall is definitely interesting for sure, and hopefully he'll do very, very well next year in those respective series, and wishing him the best of luck. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 2022 NASCAR's Penny schedule that was revealed yesterday. The season is going to start out at Sunset Speedway on March 14th. Then we'll go to Canadian Tire Motorsports Park on May 22nd. Then we'll go to Chaudière on June 11th, and then we'll go to a track that has not been announced at this time on June 25th. Then we'll go to the Toronto Street Course on July 15th, and then about a week later, we're going to go to Edmonton on July 23rd. Then we're going to go to Saskatoon on July 27th, which is going to be a doubleheader, and it's the only doubleheader that's going to take place on the NASCAR Penny schedule in 2022. Then we're going to go to GP3R on August 7th, and then 9 days later, we're going to go to Oshawa on August 16th. Then we're going to go to iCar on August 27th, and then we'll go back to Canadian Tire Motorsports Park on September 4th, and then we're going to finally end the season at Delaware Speedway on July 25th. Toronto's returning to the schedule for the first time in a couple years. They did not have a race this year because of the COVID-19 protocols. They did not have a race. I don't think any street races in 2022. So Edmonton, I don't also believe, did not happen in 2022. But overall, I know the schedule is really, really short and there's only 13 races on the schedule. But it actually is a really, really solid and a really, really good schedule for the Penny Series. You've got a lot of diversity on the schedule. You've got short tracks on the schedule. You got road courses, and you also have street courses on the schedule as well. So I think that the schedule overall, in my opinion, is very, very solid. I really like it a lot. And I might also check out the Penny Series. I really never have watched the Penny Series before, so I definitely need to check it out. The series can definitely be really, really rough, and we can see a lot of sheet metal and tempers flaring in that respective series. But really overall interesting for sure that the Penny Series is scheduled. I like it a lot, and I'm really excited for the Penny Series schedule going into next season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Rev Racing. As was announced yesterday, the Performance Racing Industry show that Chevrolet has partnered up with Rev Racing and will support NASCAR's Drive for Diversity program starting in 2022. And this will be a multi-year partnership and will start in the 2022 season and will likely be for years to come. This is really, really big. Rev Racing is a team that has had a lot of big moves. They've got 2 drivers that will be driving for their organization next year. They will have Nick Sanchez driving one of their cars, and also Roger Kroof will be driving as well. And we're also going to see Nick Sanchez run for VJ McLeod Motorsports in 2022 on a part-time basis. And we're also next year going to see Roger Kroof drive a few select races for Alpha Prime Racing in 2022 for officially transitioning to the team on a full-time basis, most likely in 2023. This is really, really big for Rev Racing development side of things. They have, I think, been partnered up for Toyota for a very, very long time. But a lot of the development, what's interesting, is a lot of development in the ARCA series. They're moving technically away from the Toyota side of things, and they're moving over to Chevy development right now. And I think that's because Chevy has a lot more rides available right now, which is why they're doing this. But what this also means is Rev Racing is going to have better equipment. They haven't partnered up with Chevy technically in the past. I think they actually were this year. But what this means for Rev Racing is it's going to mean that their cars are going to get better. We saw Nick Sanchez pick up his first career ARCA victory earlier this year, and I really think that this could be really, really big and massive overall as a whole for this team. So I hope that they do very, very well next year for both their drivers. I think that they will be championship contenders next year, especially Chevy getting involved. This also will make the ARCA field a lot stronger next year, and you will have more competition for 2022. So overall, I'm really, really excited about this as a whole, that Rev Racing is signed for a partnership for 2022. I think it's really, really awesome. I'm happy about this overall for sure, that Rev Racing has a multi-year partnership going into next year. I think overall it is extremely awesome, and I'm really happy to see this for sure. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ernie Francis Jr. As it was confirmed at the PRI Racing Show that Ernie Francis Jr. is going to drive for Force Indy in Indy Lights in 2022. No surprise there. There's been rumors for a couple weeks now that most likely that this was going to be the case. Ernie Francis Jr. is a 7-time Trans Am champion and was really the standout performer of the SRX and finished second in the SRX championship in their inaugural season. And the guy what's crazy is he is only 23 or 24 years old, and he's already won 7 Trans Am championships. And they did talk about he did say that there maybe been some talk about maybe running in NASCAR, but he basically said that there's no confirmation that he will most likely run in NASCAR next year, so he'll be focusing on the Indy Lights Championship next year. I think Ernie Francis Jr. absolutely is going to be a contender in Indy Lights in 2022. I think he's a driver that is extremely talented and knows how to get it done, and I think he'll do very well next year. I think we're going to see him potentially run IndyCar eventually and get up to a Team Penske car at some point long-term down the road. But I am a huge fan of Ernie Francis Jr. I wonder if Camping World's also going to be involved with this, because Camping World has tried to get involved with Ernie Francis Jr., and they would sponsor his endeavors and help him out. Since Camping World, of course, does sponsor the SRX, they'd probably be able to go out there and help him out. But I think that this is really, really cool that Ernie Francis Jr. is going to be running Indy Lights. Like I said, there's been speculation for a while. He had been testing the cars, but it's really awesome that Ernie Francis Jr. is officially going to be running full-time for Force Indy in Indy Lights in 2022. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about street courses. Now, this was from the same show that PRI. Roger Penske was talking about potential of street course in NASCAR. He's asked about this, and he says that he speculates that NASCAR will be on street courses at some point in the near future. I will say I also do believe that there most likely are going to be street courses on the NASCAR schedule in the next couple years. I think that we are going to see a street course in 2023. There are 2 potential tracks that we could see. The first one, of course, is the Chicago street course. We saw the iRacing in for Chicago street course, and there have been talk that maybe there was going to be a street course race in 2022. But now it looks like potentially that race is going to happen in 2023 if that's the track that they go with. So I think that potentially is the first track that they're looking at for a potential run for a street course race. The other track that I think potentially could end up getting a street course race, of course, is the Miami Grand Prix track. The F1 series schedule will have the Miami GP. This will be the first time the F1 has had 2 races on their schedule in a very, very long time. And there potentially could be 3 races, also a Las Vegas race in 2023 as well. But I think that potentially could be. The Miami promoters of that track has said that they really have wanted to get involved, maybe having NASCAR and other respective series like IndyCar as well get involved in that respectively as well. So there's 2 potential tracks there, but I'm leaning more towards Chicago getting it, just because Chicago is a big market for NASCAR, and I think that if they were wanting to get involved in having a big market, I really believe that they would choose, I think, Chicago bigger than Miami, because even though Miami would be a great track to go, even though we haven't seen racing there, even though I think it would be a great area to go to, they do have a race in Homestead, Miami, and I think NASCAR is still trying to chase that Chicago market. Chicago's got a lot of people, and also I think a street course race will be really, really good for the fans overall as well. So hopefully it happens really, really soon, and I think it would be great for the sport if we could see street courses on the schedule really, really soon. But I trust what Roger Penske's saying. He's speculating, and I honestly do as well believe that there's a very strong possibility that that is going to be the case. I think it's going to happen very, very soon, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Stewart Friesen. As Stewart Friesen was yesterday tested the next-gen car at Lancaster, South Carolina, and Wimmerville Speedway yesterday. And it was a dirt tire test. Now, from looking at the dirt tire test, the car absolutely sounds really, really amazing. If you notice on the car, there are definitely some notable differences on the car. The biggest notable, of course, that there is no splitter on the cars. Last year for the first dirt race at Bristol, they did not have splitters for the Gen 6 cars, and most likely they will, and again for this car, there most likely will not be a splitter on the car as well, which is what they're testing. There will be a valence on the car, which honestly I wish that there was overall a valence on the car anyways, on the next-gen car, not a splitter. I think it would make the racing better. The splitter is a little more flanged, which means air will get under the car as well. Looking at this dirt tire test, it actually does not look really, really bad. The car, I think, looks absolutely incredible for what they are trying to overall do with the next-gen car, especially for the dirt race. They're testing this car for the Bristol dirt race, which is going to be taking place on Easter evening. So I'm really hopefully that this test ends up well. Stewart Friesen said he was really, really happy with the test. He will not probably be racing a Cup Series race, though, at Bristol Dirt, just because of the fact that, of course, they were not going to choose somebody that was going to run the Cup Series race, so most likely he's not going to compete in that dirt race at Bristol. But I think it's really, really cool. I think he had some really exciting and some really, really awesome and great feedback about that, and I'm really happy to see that the test went very, very well. I think it's great, and hopefully we'll hear more about maybe some more testing, because I think it's going to be the only test for the dirt test. There will be more on that soon, but that was from the dirt test that took place at Bristol Dirt. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Roger Penske's thoughts on the next-gen car. He was asked at the PRA show about that, and he says that I wish I could tell you about the next-gen car. He says he really doesn't have enough to really discuss his thoughts on the next-gen car. That is definitely really, really surprising, considering we're less than 60 days from the start of the NASCAR Cup Series season, when the season technically starts on February 6th at the Clash at the LA Clash. It's really surprising to hear that Roger Penske, who is an owner of a NASCAR Cup Series team, he really doesn't have a lot of information, which is a little bit concerning, to be perfectly honest with you, when you have an owner of a team basically saying there is concern. Denny Hamlin's another owner that has expressed a lot of concerns about the next-gen car at the same time as well. Just because you have, a lot of drivers who are also really, really concerned that don't really have a good vintage on what it's going to be on intermediate tracks. Because a lot of drivers feel really, really confident about the road course side of things, but I don't think a lot of drivers are really, really happy with the direction that NASCAR is going, especially on the side of the intermediate tracks. So we'll talk more about what potentially they could be doing for the intermediate tracks, because there's going to be a test that's coming up at the Charlotte over here in a couple of days. Actually, next week there's going to be a test, but I find it really, really interesting. You have a team owner coming out and basically saying that he really doesn't have a good vintage point of the next-gen car. Because like I said, we're less than 60 days from the start of the season technically, and we're probably only about 70, 80 days technically from the first intermediate race, and we still don't really have a good vantage point of how it's going to race. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, and what we'll talk more about the test here in just a second for today, the pre-test. But I do think it's frustrating. I think a lot of team owners or drivers are frustrated about the direction NASCAR is going. I think they just really want to know what's going on with the car, and they kind of want to lead direction what's going on. So it overall is what it is, and it's kind of frustrating, though, at the same time, that they're not able to figure out, and a lot of team owners don't know what's going on with the car, to be honest with you. And now we're going to head and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Kyle Larson in IndyCar. Now, from the same show, from the PRA show that Roger Penske recently hosted, he says that he wants to put Kyle Larson in IndyCar at some point, and really wants to put Kyle Larson in a Team Penske IndyCar for the Indianapolis 500 at some point, and maybe eventually, potentially in 2022 as well. We've talked about this on the channel multiple times about Kyle Larson potentially running the Indianapolis 500 in 2022. There are a lot of outside factors that could really, really contribute to Kyle Larson, though, not running the Indy 500 in 2022. I think the first factor, of course, is the fact that one is the schedule for 2022. Now, the schedule is not as bad next year just because the Indy 500 qualifying in the final practice is on the same day as the All-Star race, though I do believe that all the charter cars are required to run. I think all the cars that have charter drivers, all the drivers are running full-time, I think are technically required to run, even though maybe they could have a substitute that could come in and run the race for him, and it's the All-Star race, for crying out loud. I think one thing that could help Kyle Larson's case, though, of running Indy 500 next year is the fact that he just won the 2021 NASCAR Cup Series championship. And Ron Miller also says that he really has one of his last dying wishes was to have Kyle Larson run the Indianapolis 500. And I think there is a chance next year that he runs a Team Penske Indy car. Now, right now, Team Penske has 3 full-time drivers for next year. Scott McLaughlin in the 3, Joseph Newgarden in the 2, and then the other driver, of course, being Will Power in the 12. The other car is still potentially available for next year, and I think that they are going to run a 4th Indy car for Team Penske. It will most likely come from Kyle Larson running that car, so I think that there is a very strong possibility of happening. And I'll say this, I really do want to see Kyle Larson run the Indy 500 next year. And I think most people really want it too, but there are a lot of outside factors. Now, I do also think another big factor that could come into play is if he does have a win in the Cup Series next year. I think if he wins, I think he'll run the Indy 500. I think if he gets a win, I think he's easily going to win races next year with the next-gen car. I could not be entirely wrong, and he struggles, but I think that Kyle Larson is going to run the Indy 500 next year, and I think it's going to come. I think he has a chance of running it next year, and there are some outside factors that can come into play, but I think that here is a really, really strong possibility and a really strong chance of them potentially running the Indy 500 in 2022. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but I think that there is a very strong possibility that he could run the Indianapolis 500 in 2022. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Dreyer Reinbold Racing's 2022 Indianapolis 500 plans. They announced yesterday, I also believe at the PRI Racing Show, that they are going to fill 2 cars for the Indianapolis 500 in 2022. And the 2 drivers are Sage Karam will be in the 24, and Santino Ferrucci will be in the 23 car for them in 2022 for the Indianapolis 500. I also think that Hy-Vee will potentially be sponsoring Santino Ferrucci in the Indianapolis 500 2022, though that has not been confirmed at this time, but that is going to be the case. This, in my opinion, is a very, very stout lineup. Sage Karam does not surprise me. He's turned to Dreyer Reinbold Racing, though. He, of course, has driven for Dreyer Reinbold Racing for I think, since around 2017 or 2018. He has driven for Dreyer Reinbold Racing's team. He also has raced in NASCAR over the last couple weeks, and there's still talk about him potentially running some stock car races in 2022 as well. Same thing with Santino Ferrucci, competing for Sam Hunt Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, but also has been really, really good in Indianapolis 500. He's finished in the top 10 in all 3 respective times that he's ran Indianapolis 500. When he's driven for Delacorn Racing or Ray Hall Letterman Landing Game Racing, he's been able to finish in the top 10 in all 3. So you have a really stout combination for Dreyer Reinbold Racing going into next year. And like I said, I really do believe that this team is going to be an underrated lineup going into next year. I do think the driver that's going to perform a little bit better is Santino Ferrucci, just because Santino Ferrucci has been more consistent. But I think both guys will make it into the show. I think that they will have a lot of pace next year. They had concerns, I think, about that last year, of them missing it last year. But I think that both drivers will make the Indy 500 next year. And I think that they will make, again, they're going to have to qualify in because there's no people locked in unless you're on the front row. But I believe that they will both make an Indy 500. And there are 2 drivers that I think are going to be very strong going into the 2022 IndyCar season. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Jeb Burton. Now, Jeb Burton was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, and he was talking about what his plans are for 2022. He says he does have something for 2022, and hopes to be able to announce it soon. He's looking forward to getting the building process going and trying to win races for these organizations. Now, what potentially will he be going next year? There are 2 potential rides that I could see him going to in 2022. The first one is SS Greenlight Racing. He posted earlier this morning on his social media pages on Twitter, and he basically had a little bit of a 7 logo on it, which potentially can be he be going to SS Greenlight Racing and being in the 07 car and replacing Joe Graf Jr. in their team in 2022. The other ride, and what a lot of people have been indicating, is Our Motorsports and driving one of the Our Motorsports cars in 2022. I'll talk about where I think he should go to if these 2 rides are available. I personally think that if he wanted a good opportunity to win races because he wants to go to a team that wins races, I think he has to go to Our Motorsports. Our Motorsports is a lot more competitive of a team than SS Greenlight Racing. I think that they are a better team. I think that they are a more competitive team. And they overall do know what they're doing a lot more than SS Greenlight Racing, though they do have a partnership with their team. And if he goes to SS Greenlight Racing, they may be able to improve. I think if he ends up at SS Greenlight Racing, though, next year and drives for their team, I think that he'll have somewhat of a very, very similar season basically will have a very similar season to what Greg Galding had in his first year with that team in 2019. So I do think that there's potential that he could end up going there in 2022. But honestly, I really don't have a clue where he's going to end up next year. So I think he's going to end up at SS Green. I think he's going to end up at one of those 2 teams in 2022. And Jeb Burton had a pretty good career at Kaulig Racing, got a win last year. So he does also have sponsorship from State Water Heaters, which is one probably big reasons why he's going to one of those teams next year. I think if he goes to one of those teams, I think he'll do very, very solid. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but I think he either ends up at SS Greenlight Racing's Xfinity Series program or Our Motorsports Xfinity Series program in 2022. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Brett Moffitt. Now, Brett Moffitt was also on Sirius in NASCAR Radio a little bit earlier before Jeb Burton jump onto this show, and he says that it's not official or done, but he and Our Motorsports continue to work towards staying together again in 2022. Brett Moffitt has driven for Our Motorsports in 2020 when he drove for GMS Racing's Truck Series program and helped build that team up in 2020, where he had a lot of sharp runs, and actually pretty much ran the full season in 2021 with Our Motorsports, but had to switch in the middle of the season from the Truck Series when he started driving for Nice Motorsports. He had to switch his points affiliations in 2021. I think at around Talladega, he had to switch his points affiliations, and then he started racing for Our Motorsports full-time in 2021. Brett Moffitt, I think 100% needs to return to this team next year. I think that he's a guy that's been really helping build this team, and he's a driver that can really be the factory driver for this team to help out. And I think Brett Moffitt is a very, very talented driver and knows what he's doing. I know that Brett Moffitt has been very, very controversial in the past, but at the same time, the guy knows what he's doing. He's a very, very talented driver. I mean, he's a Truck Series championship, for Christ's sake. He won the championship in 2018 and nearly won the championship in 2020 as well for GMS Racing, and has always been extremely competitive through his NASCAR career. So I really believe that Brett Moffitt is going to end up returning to Our Motorsports next year, and I really think that Jeff Burton is potentially going to be his teammate next year in 2022. And if those are the two drivers that do drive for their team next year, you're going to have a very stout and a really good combination going into next year. But I really think that Brett Moffitt will return to this team next year, and I think he absolutely deserves it if he does return to Our Motorsports next year. He's done very well with the team. He actually, I think, would have made the playoffs in 2021 had he actually started the season with Our Motorsports and ran for the full-time Xfinity Series points. But I think Brett Moffitt is a very talented and a really, really great driver who I think still has plenty of time in his NASCAR career. He really could take off in his career, and I think that he will get into this ride next year. I think he'll return to Our Motorsports in 2022, to be honest with you. And if he does return to it, I think he absolutely deserves it, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Team Penske's NASCAR Xfinity Series program for 2022. So I'm going to ask Bob Parkers about potentially what's going on with Team Penske's NASCAR Xfinity Series program. He says that nothing is officially out from Penske at this time, but they are not likely going to run full-time in the Xfinity Series in 2022 with a full-time car. Now, this does not mean that they are not going to run an Xfinity Series in 2022. This just means that most likely they're not going to run a full-time Xfinity Series car in 2022. It's really disappointing if they don't run a full-time Xfinity Series car in 2022. Because I think that Team Penske, they won the Owners' Points Championship in 2021. And the fact they may go from being the Owners' Points Champions in 2021 to basically not running full-time next year in 2022 is definitely disappointing. But here's what I think is going to happen next year, because I think that they're going to be returning to Xfinity in some sort of capacity. I think that they are going to run part-time next year, and they're going to have all their Cup Series drivers that are in the Team Penske group, whether that is Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, and Harrison Burton. I think that they're going to give Austin Cindric and Harrison Burton the lion's share of the stick, so those guys can have some time to develop as NASCAR Cups guys rookies. I think that they'll get into the Xfinity Series to run part-time to get some experience for the Cup Series, so they have a little bit of that experience. And I think Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski will run only a few races that year. So I think they'll potentially run all the races that they can, but they probably will not run any of the Dash or Cash races next year. But like I said, it's definitely really, really unfortunate. But I think because they were only running the 22 car full-time because Austin Cindric was in the pipeline. He had been in the pipeline for many, many years, so that's why they kept the 22 car around for so long. And Brian Wilson basically moving up to work with the Wood Brothers next year would be a crew chief for Harrison Burton. I think that's another contributing factor to why that is not going to be the case, that they're most likely not going to be full-time next year. Like I said, it's definitely really unfortunate they're not going to run full-time next year, most likely, but it is what it is, and I think they'll run in some sort of capacity next year with a certain amount of drivers, but we'll have to wait and see in regards to what happens right there. But it looks like their Xfinity Series program is not going to be returning next year. I wish they could get somebody full-time to round out their lineup, get like Haley Diggin maybe to run a few races, maybe get other drivers that are in the Truck Series in the development, like a Zane Smith perhaps, maybe put him in their car, but it doesn't entirely shock me, and it really does not 100% surprise me, honest with you, that their Xfinity Series program is most likely not going to be returning in 2022 on a full-time basis. So again, it's not been officially announced that that is going to be the case, but we're not too far away from the Xfinity Series season starting. We're like 2 months away from that season starting technically. So honestly, I don't expect that their Xfinity Series program is going to be returning in 2022, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the next-gen test that took place yesterday. It really wasn't a major test. It was really just a pre-test that took place yesterday. 3 drivers were at the track. You had Joey Logano in the Ford, Chase Elliott in the Chevy, and Christian Bell in the Toyota. There was footage that was uploaded by Christian Espinoza, who was at that test, and for one, it looks like that they were still backing off and stuff, of course, of the big runs. They were basically still aero situations, but it looked like you could still run in the pack, and you were still able to pass which is very, very solid. And they were testing out a lot of different packages for the car. There was a video that went up, I think, a day before Josh Hamilton revealed not all the parts and pieces that came out, but basically there was a side skirt there, a little bit of a side thing there, where it was a little bit more on the right, which wouldn't, still the bodies are still expected to be symmetrical, though, in some sort of aspect. Now, people have been asking in regards to what potentially the horsepower could be. Bob Pockers reported last night that NASCAR is not releasing any info on the Charlotte test from yesterday, but he said the increased horsepower, 670 among tried, was promising and less reeling of panic. Without caveat, one caveat, it was really cold, which could affect results, which is definitely true. When you have colder temperatures, you will have a little bit more grip and stuff. If it was hotter temperatures, you probably would have different results than if they were in cold temperatures. But I want to say this. I really hope and pray that NASCAR decides to go into the more horsepower side of things and they do bring more increased horsepower. I think that the less horsepower, the worse racing is going to be. I don't think the 550 horsepower package is really going to make as much good racing as the 670 horsepower package. I still think the speeds are going to be a little bit down, but Kevin Harvick even said this at 6. He really wants minimum 670 horsepower. In my opinion, I like to see more horsepower than 670 horsepower. I think I'd like to see go back to 750 horsepower and a 4-inch spoiler. But I think that if they do release this, basically reduce the size of the spoiler down to a 5 to 4-inch spoiler and keep the 670 horsepower, it really is the end of the world. And I think that we will overall get better racing than the 550 horsepower package. Again, I wish they were giving them more horsepower. And there is talk about them potentially running 750 horsepower on the intermediate tracks for the test. But I think that drivers, really, really want it. And I think that you're starting to see more drivers that are more being outspoken and more vocal about it. And they were more happy and less panicky. And there's also talk that maybe they just run the 670 horsepower package in the same package that they're running for the road course and the short tracks and all the tracks besides the super speedways, just so that there's not really any panic and that they can focus on just one car and there's no stress on the cars, which I think, honestly, if you want my opinion, if you want to save the team's money and stuff, though, you can run multiple packages in this car, apparently. In my opinion, you need to just run one universal package in 2022. I think it'll make a lot more sense and it will save teams money, and they won't have to go into 2 different packages, and it won't be as stressful. So I really hope NASCAR makes a decision. We'll see it. We'll probably hear more about what they're going to do at these tests. They're doing extra testing right now just so, of course, they get more information on what they potentially could run on the intermediates going forward. But I think it makes a lot of sense they're having this test, and I'm really happy that they decided that hopefully they make the right decision. They do increase horsepower, so the fans are happy. Luckily, there's also not as many intermediate races, because I do think the shorter oval tracks, the ones that are less than 1.5 miles, I think all those tracks also do have the 670 horsepower package right now at the moment, which makes me very, very happy. So it is what it is. Hopefully NASCAR does decide to go ahead and make the package higher than 550, but we'll have to wait and see what NASCAR decides to do going forward in the upcoming test. Now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Josh Williams. As Josh Williams will officially head to BG McLeod Motorsports on a full-time basis in 2022, driving the number 70A car. Sponsorship was not announced for the car at the time when the announcement was revealed, but most likely most of his sponsors, besides I think one, are going to be moving over with him to BG McLeod Motorsports in 2022. I am very, very excited for this, and I do think that this is a little bit of an upgrade from DGM Racing, because BG McLeod Motorsports, I think, is a team that has a lot of potential to be very, very good. We've seen it, of course, and they've had an SHR partnership. They have done very, very well, but I think Josh Williams is a very underrated driver in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He's competing for top 20s in many, many races with DGM Racing, and there has been talk about them potentially, BG McLeod Motorsports, potentially getting upgrades next year in 2022 and being a little bit more competitive going into next year. Now, what are my overall expectations for Josh Williams going into next year with BG McLeod Motorsports? My expectations are not really through the roof for him just because his car isn't as good as top tier teams, but I think it's going to surprise a lot of people next year, especially with how good of a driver he is. Also, Reese Sorensen, it was announced yesterday too, that he's going to be working with him next year as a spotter. Reese Sorensen has been doing a little more spotting in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the ARCA Series as well, a former driver in the series. But overall, my expectations for Josh Williams going into next year, I think that Josh Williams is going to do very, very well going into 2022. I think he's going to contend a lot more for top 15s and top 20s next year consistently. I could definitely see some occasional top 10s coming from the team, especially if they do see a lot of wrecks happening, because sometimes the Xfinity Series races could definitely turn into basically wreck fest, and we can see a lot of chaos, and he may end up running up front a lot more because, of course, I don't think he's going to beat teams like RCR, Kaulig Racing, Joe Gibbs Racing, even Sam Hunt Racing, those smaller teams. But I do think that this team is going to form a lot better, and I think that Josh Williams will potentially have his best career season today. Also can end up being very, very disappointing, but I don't expect that to be the case. I think that Josh Williams is going to do very, very well next year. I'm really excited about this. I know a lot of people wanted him to go to Kaulig Racing in the number 10 car for next year, and he's been a really, really good backup, but honestly, the guy that's getting into the ride next year, I think is better. We'll get into that here in just a little bit, but I'm very excited to see that Josh Williams is going to be returning to Xfinity full-time. He'll be driving for Beach McLeod. I think this is a great move, and I'm excited to see that he'll be driving for Beach McLeod Motorsports next year in 2022. And now we're going to jump on to the first of three major stories of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Takuma Sato. It was announced yesterday morning that Takuma Sato will drive full-time in the number 51 for Dilcoin Racing with Rickware Racing Partnership in IndyCar in 2022. This has been rumored for a little bit now. A lot of insiders in the IndyCar side of things have said that this was most likely going to be the case, and now it's officially confirmed with Honda backing that Takuma Sato will be driving for the team. It was announced earlier that he would not be returning to Rahal Letterman Land again because they announced their lineup, and now we'll see Takuma Sato in this car on a full-time basis. This, in my opinion, is a really, really excellent and a very, very solid move to bring Takuma Sato back to the IndyCar Series next year on a full-time basis. Takuma Sato, of course, a two-time Indianapolis 500 winner, and he's going to bring a lot to the table next year for this team in 2022. I've been a huge fan of Takuma Sato. He's a really, really excellent oval racer and knows how to get it done. And Dilcoin Racing, especially on ovals, has really, really excelled. And to be honest with you, for the Indy 500, I think that they will qualify very, very well going into 2022. And I think that he's going to exceed our expectations going into the 2022 season. So overall, I am extremely excited about this. He's going to be driving for the Dilcoin Racing organization next year. I've been, like I said, a huge fan of Takuma Sato, and like I said, I really hope and pray that Takuma Sato does, in my opinion, he does end up doing really, really well next year. My expectations are really, really high for him. I think he'll do very, very well, and of course, it's a Rickware partnership, which is why we're talking about this today. So it's a good move, and the other driver most likely that's going to be taking over the other ride for Dilcoin Racing in the 18 car is most likely going to be Dave Malukas, who I believe finished second in the Indy Lights Championship. So that's another driver that's going to end up driving for the team. Dave Malukas has also been really, really good and really, really fast in testing at the same time, too. So hopefully we'll see this team do very, very well next year, but I'm really excited to see that Takuma Sato is going to be running full-time next year in IndyCar again. I think it's great for the sport that you can have a driver like Takuma Sato who has a really, really good personality, but also humble personality at the same time as well. He feels really, really confident, and like I said, I am extremely excited to see that Takuma Sato is going to be running full-time. We've seen how Ramon Grosjean did with the Dilcoin Racing organization next year. This past season, he did extremely well, was really, really impressive, and I think Takuma Sato is just going to be almost as impressive, if not better, than what Ramon Grosjean did in 2021. So I'm very happy about this. Takuma Sato is getting another opportunity. It's sad that he could not return to Rahal Letterman Land again, but Honda really wanted to keep him in IndyCar, and they're really, really paying the bills, I think, for Takuma Sato, though they will have Nurtec on that 51 car pretty much the full season in 2022. So very happy that he's going to be returning to that team next year, and I'm excited to see what he's going to be able to do with their team in 2022. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Boris Said. Now, there was something that was posted on from the PRI Racing Show with NBM Motorsports. They were at the PRI Racing Show, and Josh Stigman had caught this on there, and it says Boris Said's name on their next-gen car. And it looks like potentially Boris Said might be returned to the NASCAR Cup Series in 2022 with NBM Motorsports. Now, it doesn't look like it will be a full-time basis if he does return to NBM Motorsports. They did not confirm this being the case, and they don't entirely have sponsorship right now set up for the car next year. But it looks like he's going to be returning to the Cup Series in 2022, and most likely he will run all the road course races in 2022 with this being the case. Boris Said, for a lot of you knows, guy has a really, really big afro, but also a driver that I think was extremely good on road courses. He had not been in NASCAR for 3 years. He made his return in 2021 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, where he drove for a few select races. I think he drove at COTA, and also I believe drove, at Road America. Unfortunately, failed to qualify for that. And also, I do believe he attempted to qualify for at the Indy road course as well. So I think Watkins Glen too, I think he tried to race there as well. So he made a few starts, and he also did test the next-gen car recently at the Charlotte Roval. So he has experience, and I think one of the things you're going to see, I think long term in the next couple years especially, is you're going to see a lot of road course ringers coming back. I mean, you got Jacques Villeneuve, who tested the action car recently too, guy that ran a lot of road course races, who also could potentially be making his return to NASCAR as well here in 2022. First time he potentially could be racing in the Cup Series. And I think literally almost 11 or 12 years. It's been a long time since he's raced. But like I said, the last time that Boris Said competed in the Cup Series was 2017. I think it was with Premium Motorsports before they incorporated with Rick Ware Racing. But I'm really happy to see that Boris Said could potentially be returning next year. A lot of Said heads and will be really, really happy about this. Like, I know that Boris Said is like 6 years old now, so he's a much older driver. But Boris Said, even a few years before he retired, like in 2014, I remember he got into a Go Fast racing car in 2014, and he ended up finishing, I think, in the top 25 in that race. He ran extremely well. He drove for other teams. He's driven for many respectable teams. He drove the 60 car, I think, for his own cars in 2007 and 2008 and 2006 as well. He's driven for a lot of respectable teams. Drove for the 01 car back in 2003 and qualified on the pole at Sonoma. And I think Boris Said is going to be a very surprising contender and potentially could do very, very well NBM. I don't expect their cars to be really, really fast next year, though. We'll have to wait and see how much better their cars are. The Action car is supposed to even the playing field a little bit, but I do think that Boris Said coming back next year to sport, I think it's something that I think a lot of fans should overall be very happy with if he is going to make his return next year, because I think a lot of fans would like to see the Said man make his return, and I hope he does return next year. I think it'll be great for the sport if he can return next year. I hope it's the case, and Boris Said might be making his return to the NASCAR Cup Series next year. I hope it is the case, because if it is the case, I think it would be a happy day to rejoice for the fans overall in racing. I hope that he does, though, make his return to NASCAR in 2022. And now we're going to ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Landon Cassill. We talked about this on the channel a couple days ago. Landon Cassill is very likely to be going to Kaulig Racing in 2022. Well, it was officially confirmed yesterday that Landon Cassill is going to be going to the 10 for Kaulig Racing in 2022. He, I believe, will be driving for Kaulig Racing for 2 years in 2022 and 2023, and Voyage will be sponsoring for both of those seasons in 2022. Landon Cassill will also be paying in crypto. Now, Voyager, of course, will be paying their team, Kaulig Racing, in American dollars, but they'll be paying Landon Cassill fully in crypto in 2022 as well. I am extremely excited about this for Landon Cassill. I think Landon Cassill is a driver that unfortunately has been a driver that has been working his ass off for so long. Landon Cassill has been around really since I became a fan of the sport. He was a Hendrick development driver back in 2007 and made a few select starts for Junior Motorsports in 2008. So this is his first winning opportunity in a car since 2021, since 2008. And you have to remember that he was only 18 or 19 years old back in 2007 to 2008. So the expectations, especially for him, were really through the roof because they had guys like Kyle Busch coming into the series. And let's be for real, there was a lot of issues there. Of course, he had the situation Mark Martin, Brad Keselowski happened. They were going to put him eventually in there. Had the Junior Motorsports thing not formed, I really think that Landon Cassill could have potentially been in a Hendrick car. He had somewhere remain in the Hendrick program I think up until 2011 before leaving them in around 2012 to go to BK Racing and other teams. And he's been a driver that has been grinding for a very, very long time, and a driver that I think deserves it. People are calling him a paid driver. When you look at him historically and look where he's raced, he's not a paid driver. He's a guy that's been invested in crypto, has sponsorship behind him, has funding behind him now with crypto. And I'm not a guy that really knows much about crypto, but from what I know, crypto, you can make a ton of money off it. And for people saying, oh, crypto, he's not making any money off it, you can make millions off of crypto. And I think he 100% understands the risk of crypto potentially falling through for him and it potentially being a big problem. But at the same time, I think that he knows the risk, and I think that he deserves it. Now, let's talk about the Kaulig lineup as well next year. I think the Kaulig Xfinity Series lineup going into 2022, I think it is the best lineup in the NASCAR Xfinity Series going into next year. You have Daniel Hemrick, who's going to be going to the 11 car next year. Daniel Hemrick, of course, picking up his first career NASCAR Xfinity Series victory, but at the same time, also winning the 2021 NASCAR Xfinity Series Championship after picking up his first win and doing that really epic burnout after winning the Xfinity Series Championship. So he'll be driving the 11. AJ Allmendinger, who had his breakout year, basically his resurgence here in 2021, winning 5 Xfinity Series races in 2021, I believe, and also picking up his second career NASCAR Cup Series victory in the NASCAR Cup Series at the Indianapolis Road Course and was a championship contender in the number 16 car. And now you have Landon Cassill, a driver who's proven and who's been doing this for a very, very long time. Landon Cassill has, I think, nearly like 500 starts all around in all three respective series, whether it's the Truck Series, the Xfinity Series, or the Cup Series. He has a lot of respective experience. And like I said, I am really, really happy for him going into next year. I think he has a really, really great opportunity. And I know that people probably think he's going to struggle next year. I don't think that to be the case. He took a Morgan Shepherd racing car, a Shepherd Ventures racing car. And I remember correctly, I think last year at Homestead, before the team really stopped showing up, he ran in the top 15 and top 20 in those cars and qualified extremely well at points with the Shepherd Ventures racing car. And that should tell you, because that car generally a lot of times was a start and park car, especially back in the late 2010s. But the fact that this car potentially he did really well in that tells me he has a lot of talent. And he's not a driver that's amazing, like a top tier talent, but he's a great driver and a very solid driver and also a team player as well. Which you look at Kaulig Racing too, they're a team that is around being a team player organization as a whole. Now, what are my expectations for Landon Cassill next year? I think Landon Cassill is going to get a couple victories next year, and I think that they will, the whole team as a whole is going to get all of them to the round of 8 next year, and I think that Landon Cassill is going to get a couple victories next year. But like I said, overall, I am really, really excited to see that Landon Cassill is going to be returning to Xfinity next year on a full-time basis with Kaulig Racing. This is his first winning opportunity in such a long time, and I think that a lot of people that are fans of people who work their asses off in this sport, they should overall be really, really happy about this. I know some people are not happy about this because, of course, Landon Cassill is around crypto, and not a lot of people are overall major, major fans of crypto. Well, some are, but some people are not really, really happy about that. I think, though, it's a very fantastic move, and talent is getting rewarded. So you've got the best lineup in Xfinity Series next year. I do think Joe Gibbs has a good lineup next year. Ty Gibbs and Brandon Jones, though I will say Brandon Jones isn't as great. Junior Motorsports, I think, is the closest team to them. But at the same time, I'm very excited to see that we're going to see Landon Cassill in a full-time in Xfinity Series car next year. I think it's great to see that talent actually does end up getting rewarded in our sport. That's something that it's been very tough to do, especially with sponsor dollars coming in. But I'm really happy to see that Landon Cassill is officially going to be going to Kaulig Racing next year. I think this is a really, really exciting move, and I'm happy to see that Landon Cassill is getting an opportunity. And that's another major car off the market, which really hurts drivers like Ryan Preece and Matt DiBenedetto's opportunity. They better hope those guys do end up finding rides really, really soon. But I think a deserving driver is going into that 10 car next year. So anyway, that is it for today's NASCAR news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, turn notifications to be notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on pages as well. Let's go jump over that and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your expectations for Kaulig Racing going into 2022 and Landon Cassill? Do you think Landon Cassill is going to impress, or do you think he's going to struggle in 2022? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts on all the other NASCAR stories discussed and IndyCar stories we discuss here on today's on the channel? Let me know in the comments below. I've got a special video that's going to be dropping tomorrow, another team preview for Petty and GMS Motorsports that should be dropping on the channel tomorrow. You'll see that tomorrow morning. Anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time with some more great and awesome NASCAR and IndyCar and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.